Hey guys, so this video is going to be players I'm avoiding for fantasy football 2019. And obviously it's more fun to talk about players you love and stuff like that because you're praising people rather than talking against them. But every year in fantasy there's people that fall outside of where they were drafted and people that bust. And I'm trying to get a gauge on which guys are going to do that this year, and I've done some research about it, and here are my results, so I hope you guys enjoy. The first player is Devonta Freeman, who is a third round pick right now in fantasy drafts, which is a price I cannot see myself drafting him at. Freeman has missed 16 games the last 2 seasons and has a big list of nagging injuries since being in the NFL. He's had sports hernia surgery, which he had last year in 2018, PCL and MCL sprains, and multiple concussions and hip strains. It's not just the injuries that scare me off of Freeman, but it's his role on the team that concerns me as well. We already know that Ito Smith has a role on this team, and there's a chance he steals the third down work from Freeman because Smith is arguably a better pass catcher than Freeman is. There's also a chance that the Falcons' 5th-round rookie Quadri Olison can steal the team's goal line work. He's 6'2", 225 pounds. Also, with Freeman's concussion history, I'm not sure the Falcons would want to use him as a battering ram around the goal line in goal line situations. Aside from 2015 when he was the #1 fantasy running back, it's not like Freeman has been given a workhorse role. He's just survived on touchdowns and decent efficiency. In 2016 and 2017, where he was healthy, Freeman has only been given 14 rushing attempts per game and only 2.6 receptions per game in 2017. I do expect the Falcons offense to put up big numbers as usual, which could propel Freeman to have a decent touchdown total, but him staying healthy seems like a big question mark. Even if he's given 15 carries per game and played all 16 games, I'm not sure he'll put up the big numbers that you would expect. In 2017, which was his last healthy season, Freeman only averaged 4.4 yards per carry, so who even knows if he has it anymore once he gets back healthy. The worst case scenario for Freeman is that he becomes a player that the Falcons use between the 20s, which would take away his goal line usage and of course his reception usage, which would go to Ito Smith. That's not what you want from a fantasy running back in the 3rd round. Freeman is only 27, but backs his size and with that injury history are definitely something to worry about. Every player has a price, and if Freeman can go into the 5th round, then I'm sure I'll take the chance, but as a 3rd round pick, that seems way too high to me. He's also going in front of guys like Leonard Fournette, Derrick Henry, and Kerryon Johnson, which I find puzzling. Darius Guice is someone I was a fan of in college, but since coming into the NFL, he's dealt with some unfortunate injuries. He tore his ACL in last year's preseason, and in this preseason, he's dealt with hamstring issues. Doesn't this sound familiar? Does Dalvin Cook from last season ring a bell? This is a very similar situation because after his torn ACL, Dalvin Cook dealt with hamstring injuries that kept him sidelined in 2018. To make it worse, Guice dealt with some setbacks and an infection on that surgically repaired knee. Right now, Guice is hovering between the 6th and 7th round in fantasy, and I'm still a fan of him for the future, but not for 2019. Honestly, if you're a dynasty owner and Guice gets off to a bad start in 2019, I'd try to buy him while he's cheap. There are also questions with the Redskins' offensive line. Their left tackle Trent Williams seems like he has no interest in being a Redskin this season, which can only hurt their offense. We also can't forget about the competition in that backfield with Adrian Peterson and now Chris Thompson back healthy. Thompson already has his role carved out as the pass-catching option in the backfield, and when they're playing from behind, which will probably be a lot for Washington, Thompson will be on the field. Adrian Peterson also had a 1,000-yard season last year, so it's not like he's done either. So between his health and the Redskins not being too good and him sharing the backfield with 2 other players, I'm avoiding Guice in drafts. There's a good chance I'll be all over him next year, but I don't see 2019 being a good season for Guice to break out. There's always hype surrounding a player on a new team, and that applies for Tevin Coleman in 2019. From the outside, it all looks good. Coleman is finally a clear-cut #1 starter and playing with Kyle Shanahan, who he played under in Atlanta. Here's my problem with Coleman. With the aforementioned Devonta Freeman playing only 2 games last season, it was Coleman's time to shine, and he definitely disappointed in my opinion. Last year, Coleman finished as the RB number 19 in fantasy after being given 167 carries and 44 targets. With Coleman sharing the backfield with Jerick McKinnon and Matt Breida, I don't see him getting more work than he did last season. I honestly don't expect any back to have over 200 carries in this backfield, assuming they're all relatively healthy. With Coleman being a 6th round pick in fantasy and the lack of expected carries, I don't see the upside of picking Coleman. I'd like to buy Coleman because I don't think he's a bad player, I'm just not a fan of his situation. He's going around players like Tariq Cohen, James White, and Lamar Miller, and if I'm in any kind of PPR league, I take all those guys over Coleman probably. If one of the competing backs in Breda or McKinnon are shockingly cut, then I change my stance on Coleman, but from where things are right now, I probably won't be drafting him. Last year in my sleepers video, I had Kenny Golladay, and that worked out pretty well. In 2019, I'm doing a complete 180 and I'm avoiding Kenny Golladay. I like the player, but it's the situation and who the Lions hired as offensive coordinator. The Lions fired Jim Bob Cooter and hired Darrell Bevell, and if you're familiar with Bevell, you know he loves to run the football. In 12 years as an offensive coordinator, Bevell finished top half in rushing in 9 out of those 12 seasons. In passing, Bevell's teams finished top half in passing twice in that 12-year span. It seems like every year the Lions put emphasis on running the ball, and Matt Patricia definitely has that mindset of wanting to be a physical run-first team. The Lions finally have a talented back after many years of underwhelming running backs. We all know the Lions haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher since 2013 when Reggie Bush got there by 6 yards. If healthy, Johnson should see enough volume to get him there. Golladay really came on at the end of 2018 after Golden Tate was traded and Marvin Jones went down in the second half of the season with an injury. Golladay was an absolute target hog, averaging 9.6 targets per game after Jones went down. It made sense because Golladay was the only decent receiver the Lions had on the field at that point. Now the Lions have a healthy Marvin Jones, signed Danny Amendola, have TJ Hawkinson, and a run-heavy coordinator. Golladay has the talent to prove me wrong and put up an efficient season on limited targets, but if you're looking for a major upside player in the 4th or 5th round, I would not be targeting Kenny Golladay. Golladay is being drafted around guys like Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp, and even Tyler Lockett, and I'd probably take all of them over Golladay because they should see more targets than him this season. As I said, I could be wrong because Golladay can turn a 90-target season into a 10-touchdown campaign, but it's just not likely. So I will take the guaranteed targets and probably go elsewhere this season. Alshon Jeffery is entering his 3rd season with the Eagles, and this is his age 29 season. In 2018, Jeffery finished outside of the wide receiver 2 territory as wide receiver number 25 and played in only 13 games. Last season, Jeffery had a target share in the Eagles offense at 22.6%, which is lower than players like Michael Gallup, Zay Jones, and Josh Doxson. If that's not bad enough, the Eagles added more receiving weapons this offseason. Obviously, the Eagles brought back longtime receiver Deshaun Jackson, drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and have re-signed Darren Sproles, who's bound to soak up some targets himself. They still have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert and Nelson Aguilar as well. I won't go over all of them, but we all know Jeffery has a lengthy injury history, and not all were major ones, but he's a guy who seems to be constantly dinged up. He missed the first few weeks of 2018 due to rotator cuff surgery and had many lower body injuries before that. Jeffery only had 92 targets in his 13 games, which isn't a lot for a presumed number 1 receiver in a high-powered offense. Of course, Zach Ertz had a whopping 156 targets last season, but he's not going anywhere, and the man behind him in Dallas Goedert has loads of talent as well, and should be on the field more for 2019, which can only hurt Alshon. Right now, Jeffery is a 6th round pick, which isn't an awful price, but I take my shot on someone with a better injury history and should see more targets in his offense. Jeffery is going ahead of guys like Robbie Anderson, Allen Robinson, Will Fuller, and Christian Kirk. Of course, being a number 1 receiver in a good offense looks really nice, but we should pay attention to the targets and production even more. Lastly, we haven't seen Carson Wentz play a full season in 2 years, so that'll hinder any Eagles receiver if he's not out there. If you watch my tight end sleepers video, you know I'm high on Jack Doyle and not so much on Eric Ebron. The truth is that when Doyle was healthy, he was on the field more than Eric Ebron. The worst thing you can do in fantasy is overdraft a player based on his touchdown production because it's the hardest thing to replicate. Ebron scored 13 touchdowns last season, and before that, he never had over 5. It was a new team, but it had a lot to do with luck, no pun intended, and other pieces around him being injured. The 2019 Colts look a lot different. Not only is Jack Doyle back, but they also added red zone threat Devin Funchess and drafted receiver Paris Campbell in the 2nd round. Last season, Ebron was the obvious red zone choice, but adding 2 guys that are over 6'4" and Doyle and Funchess will negate most of that. In the games that Doyle and Ebron played together, Doyle saw more targets in 4 out of 5 of those games, and the one he didn't was a tie. If Doyle wasn't there, I'd be more optimistic about Ebron, but he affects his ceiling and playing time too much for me to buy in. Right now, Ebron is being drafted ahead of guys like Vance McDonald and David Njoku, which is hard to believe, but it's happening. So there's a good chance a healthy Jack Doyle sees more targets than Ebron, but Doyle goes 6 rounds later in drafts, which doesn't make much sense. Don't buy a guy at peak value because of his touchdowns. You're better off waiting at the tight end position because there are good values later. That'll be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.